morning, everyone. Today, my group and I will be informing you on the North-South Division and westward expansion. The North-South Division was influenced by the American Civil War and other contributing factors. Dividing the two was the Mason-Dixon line. As the two sides split, they began relying on different resources to provide for their side. The North relying heavily on industrial equipment and the South relying on agriculture. The South's fertile soil and warm climate made growing crops easy. Slavery was a major contributing factor to the divide. The North strongly believed that a human should not have the right to own another human. An abolition movement was put into place to end slavery. The South totally opposed because the slaves were increasing economical profits. As the North and South grew apart, a national plan to unify the country because the slaves were increasing economical profits. As the North and South grew apart, a national plan to unify the country became increasingly important. The Manifest Destiny and Louisiana Purchase both aided the idea of westward expansion. The Indian Removal Act was put into place to give land in the Louisiana Purchase. The Trail of Tears became known as the Indians were forced to march westward by the U.S. Army. In the Missouri Compromise, the basic issue at stake was slavery. The topic of slavery caused tension between many people. Famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass was born a slave in Maryland. Harriet Tubman led slaves through escape routes that became known as the Underground Railroad. Although the North opposed slavery, they had their doubts when it came to working. Escaped slaves made competition to give land in the Louisiana Purchase. The Trail of Tears became known as the Indians were forced to march westward by the U.S. Army. In the Missouri Compromise, the basic issue at stake was slavery. The topic of slavery caused tension between many people. Famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass was born a slave in Maryland. Harriet Tubman led slaves through escape routes that became known as the Underground Railroad. Although the North opposed slavery, they had their doubts when it came to working. Escaped slaves made competition with white workers as they were willing to work for lower wages. The first major battle in the American Civil War to take place was on northern soil. And now, we will have Wanisha giving you more information on the North-South divide.
Cut. Hello, my name is Devon Road. I will be talking to you about the Missouri Compromise. In an effort to preserve the balance of power in Congress between slave and free states, the Missouri Compromise was passed in 1820, admitting Missouri as a free state, Maine as a free state. In 1854, the Missouri Compromise was repealed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. The Kansas-Nebraska Act created territories for Kansas and Nebraska, opening new lands for settlement. 3 years later, the Missouri Compromise was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in Dred Scott decisions, which ruled that Congress did not have the authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. Again, my name is Devon Rowe, and I am proud to give you information about the Missouri Compromise. Goodbye!
Northerners generally turned a blind eye to the Southern lifestyle. For since the country began, the South had held the economic power due to agriculture. But by the 1850s, the balance of power was swinging northward with the manufacturing and mechanization boom of the Industrial Revolution. The borders of our country were changing as well through Manifest Destiny, and each time a fledgling territory requested statehood, the two sections of North and South would clash, particularly over the expansion of slavery.
We had no thought of discussing the subject of slavery, viewed in its social, moral, economic aspects. It was regarded as solely and exclusively a matter of state jurisdiction, and therefore one which did not concern the federal government or the states where it did not exist.
Uneasy compromise was always reached in Congress, but the animosity between the free and slave states continued to grow, especially when the number of free states were suddenly in the majority. And when religious reform began spreading in the North, crying for the absolute abolition of slavery, the South found itself on the defensive. For years, Missourians and Iowans had petitioned to open and settle the fertile territory to their west, but failed. Then in 1853, Illinois Senator Stephen Douglas proposed a bill to open up the Nebraska Territory for a transcontinental railroad. To maintain that dangerous, delicate balance between the two sections, he suggested dividing the territory into two, calling the bill Kansas-Nebraska, inciting a firestorm in Congress.
It essentially killed the Missouri Compromise and abolished the Mason-Dixon line by which the limits of slavery were restricted. It substituted the principle of popular sovereignty, which supposedly allowed the people who settled the state to decide whether slavery would abide there or not. But abolitionists and their allies moved heaven and earth to accomplish its defeat.
Of course we tried to defeat that cursed bill. It was an outrage to consider annulling the sacred compact of the Missouri Compromise and allowing the spread of slavery once again.
Using the radical theory of popular sovereignty, the presumption was that settlers in the northern portion of the territory, Nebraska, would oppose slavery, while those in the southern half, Kansas, would permit it.
Naturally, to the Missouri way of thinking, Kansas would be settled by Missourians, just as our ancestors had come from Kentucky and other slaveholding states. And naturally, our slaves would go with us.
As Congress passionately debated Kansas-Nebraska, abolitionists like Eli Thayer began to enlist immigrants to settle Kansas and keep it free from slavery. These immigration companies were also meant to make a profit for Eastern investors.
The plan was no less than to found free cities and extemporize free states. The contest took the form of the people against tyranny and slavery. The whole crowd of slave drivers and traitors, backed by a party organization, a corrupt majority in Congress, administration with its officers armed with revolvers, all together proving totally insufficient to cope with an aroused people.
Congress narrowly passed the Kansas-Nebraska bill, and President Franklin Pierce signed it into law on May 30th, 1854. With that stroke of a pen, thousands packed their wagons and headed west. With the nation watching, the battle over slavery would soon be fought in the new territory of Kansas.